Thank you, and we do appreciate you. Personally, it's an honor to be here. Really, I've always looked to Makerere. I never went to Makerere. I went to an international university somewhere in the US, but I've always looked to this as the Harvard of not only Uganda, but probably the Harvard of Africa. And so, for me, it's an honor to be here in front of Professor Barnabas, and then with my colleague Benjamin, who went here. Benjamin, welcome. And we are honored to have you. Benjamin Rugwenje is the CEO of Boundless Mind. Okay, I think we can jump in. And also, before I forget, we have Sylvie Matley online, who is the head of IRIS. I hope we can have her join the conversation.
In 2021, the University of Makerere will celebrate its 100-year anniversary, opening up an opportunity to reimagine the future of education for Africa in the context of the global pandemic, especially through the lens of digitalization. While the pandemic has forced much of the world to adopt online course systems, some countries are still lagging behind, particularly on the African continent. Lack of connectivity, lack of resources, and lack of training, digital education remains largely a minority in primary and secondary schools, but also in universities. Many African schools and students were ill-equipped for this switch to e-learning. Amid widespread challenges like infrastructure deficit, unstable electricity supply, lack of digital skills among teaching personnel and students, as well as cutthroat data costs, the most vulnerable students are hit the hardest. The questions arising are therefore, what are the lessons learned from the pandemic? What are the new needs and the challenges the education sector worldwide is facing? Will the digitalization of the education sector play a role as an international equalizer, or will it lead to more education divide? Will it allow an internalization or even a homogenization of learning and knowledge? Or will it have to adapt to local contexts? Who will set the tone and the standards when reimagining higher education at a global level?
So, Professor, we begin at a very, I think what you call in your economics language, at an inflection point, where Uganda, a country with now 45 million people, it is projected that actually by 2050, the Ugandan population will be 100 million people. However, the median age is 16. By the time our president closed the institutions of learning, we had 15 million young people in school. Meaning that if you do the math very well, literally about half the country is in school. I work with a young group of leaders who work in transforming the education of our primary schools. We have now over 11 million young people in primary school alone. Now, compounding all that with the geopolitics that is happening around Uganda, being a host, as you can see what's happening in the DRC, our friends in Ethiopia, South Sudan, Somalia, we are a hub, I think, for what we would call geopolitics, and perhaps some kind of peace and stability for our brothers and sisters. And there's no other place to start like the highest institution of learning, like Makerere University, which is a premier. I can guarantee you here, Professor, I have met Nigerians, even from West Africa, who have graduated from here. And then on top of that, we have Makerere University almost celebrating a century, 100 years of leadership, of existence, not just existence, but shaping leaders. I've met leaders in the United States who are working in shaping aerospace engineering from Makerere, leaders who are shaping healthcare in other countries and also here as well. So as we look through that, 100 years of Makerere University's existence, its leadership, its really geographical reach across the continent but also across the globe, under this theme, crisis and opportunity, mapping geopolitical importance of Africa. I think there wouldn't be any other place to start than Makerere. As our wonderful CAS country director mentioned, that a university does not exist in a vacuum. Thank you. It exists in a society. And its policies, its education, its everything that it projects into these young people goes to shape our society. And let me start at the quote by Kofi, our wonderful former UN General Secretary, Kofi Annan. He says that education is a human right with immense potential, with immense power to transform. On its foundation, on the foundation of education, rests the cornerstone of freedom, of democracy, and sustainable human development. Meaning that without education, and as we return or as we emerge out of the COVID-19 era, without the education, without the higher education, but also the primary education, the early childhood education, the secondary education, there is no way we can meet the challenges of the 21st century without that. So, Professor, starting from there, I want to start with a question. What are the lessons learned from the pandemic? What are the new needs and challenges that you know that the education faces here in Uganda and maybe across Africa and the globe? What are those lessons that you feel we have learned from this pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Of course, I want to begin by thanking my boss, the Chancellor, for his remarks, and Your Excellency, the Ambassador, Konrad-Adenauer, UN Women, Alliance Française, and IRIS for the partnership, which has enabled us for the fourth time now to host Geopolitics of Kampala. Moderator, you said you didn't come to Makerere and you went to an international university in the US. There is no university which is more international than Makerere University. And all the world statistics point to that, because we are collaborating with more universities than any other university on earth. So we are very international, sir. And welcome to Kenya.
Thank you. I'm honored.
I want to begin with the statements made about Africa's position in the world. And therefore, what we as African universities must do. By 2100, all estimates are that half of the world's population will be living in Africa. At the moment, we are only a sixth of the population. But in another 80 years, half of the population will be living in Africa. What does that mean? If our population doubles, and it doubles with the poverty which is here now, and we do not tackle issues of climate change, which is affecting us worse than any other part of the world, and we do not tackle issues of youth unemployment, then there is a huge disaster awaiting us. Makerere University was badly affected by the pandemic. But many of us are saying, thanks to the pandemic, we have woken up. I attended a meeting in Beijing just before the pandemic, organized by UNESCO. And most of the participants were actually from Africa. And I realized later it had been organized for us, Africa. And the main question was, with this digital divide, will Africa be left behind again? Mark the words again. Which means all the time we are being left behind. Of course, in modern times. You know that at one time, Africa ruled in the world. Then we became two additions and we were conquered. Now, as a universe, as a greater universe on the continent, it is our responsibility to make sure that we research and find solutions for problems that are already here, but even those that are going to come 50 years, 100 years from now, to ensure the sustainability of the African continent and the world, of course. Luckily, as I told you, we are an international university, and we have got collaborators from around the world. With support from all our collaborators, we have built a formidable force of academics who do research in all areas, but in this case, who are very much aware of issues around online education. Online education is the future, even without the pandemic. If Uganda's population doubles with the infrastructure we have now, we cannot take in all those children who will be seeking higher education. So higher education is the future. And so using the facilities that we already had, we moved very fast to train all our staff in the online education and alternative methods of education. Sensitized our students, and I want to thank our students, they adapted very fast. Because we said, we have no alternative. We cannot sit back and be left behind again. And of course, the professors, they also adapted very fast. So Makerere may not have suffered as much as the general education system in Uganda. Because now we say we have lost just 6 months. But there are institutions which have not worked for 2 years. And the implications are very severe. So we think that we as a leading university have got the responsibility and obligation to support the other universities and other institutions to come out of this. And we are currently working with organizations around the world to train our colleagues at other universities on online education. We are also supporting them to create their research capacity. And so, we really want to say we have done whatever we could in the circumstances. A lot of our activities were disrupted, but because of what I call the Makerere spirit, we have managed to move on.
Thank you, Professor. That's really wonderful remarks, and I have heard several things, including climate change, youth unemployment, the digitization of education. You're even getting ahead of me in terms of the question I wanted to ask, and how you're also partnering with other institutions to ensure that you help accelerate them into getting digitized, because it is the way to go. We cannot be left behind. Thank you, Professor. As you rest and find more ideas and insights, let me jump to Benjamin. Benjamin, welcome. For the most part, looking like a young man, but you also lead young people in education and leadership. Tell us, what are those lessons that we've learned from this pandemic? And perhaps also extrapolate it a bit. What are those needs now that are emerging for our young people, especially for education and these education opportunities? Tell us more about that and how we can learn from those lessons.
Thank you, James, and good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be sitting this side. I've attended all Geopolitics Conference, and I've always been in the audience. So finally, it feels good to be sitting on this side of the conference. Our work sits at the intersection between what is SDG 4 and SDG 8, right? So transitioning young people who are in or have dropped out of school into the world of work. And the focus is on skilling for the future of work, which essentially focuses on soft skills, so things like, or what are called 21st century skills, so things like critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, communication, collaboration, which we recognize that our schools aren't teaching, but are relevant for work. And I felt that when the pandemic hit, there was an opportunity for us to rethink things like that, right? Because there had been conversation going on around what needs to be done to inject more life into our education system so that it can serve the purpose of today and prepare young people for work. And so I'll start from the worry that I think we have missed that opportunity because we sort of, the sense that I've gotten from what's been coming our way is that we've been waiting for things to get back to normal so that we can go back to where we used to be. Of course, there were adaptations that were made by several universities, including Makerere, in spite of the context in which it exists as a public university, so the sensibilities around equity, in which case the university might have challenges getting every student onboarded, because I think it's one of the few universities which is required to take students regardless of their socio-economic background. So that has got to be put into consideration. But I believe that higher education is sort of like building a house. So when we think about reimagining higher education, it feels like we're discussing the roof, right? The quality of the roof. When in fact, there's only so much a roof can do for you if the foundations and the walls are not up to the quality that's required for that roof to serve. And I think that that's what is happening with us here. So just getting young people online, right? So there are infrastructural challenges, right? Access to the internet, right? Access to devices, digital literacy. We work with university students, and I really don't think that we should be teaching university students how to send an email, right? And yet we do. So if you think of simple things like that, then you realize the challenges that our universities face, but also the challenges that our education is facing in terms of where we need to go. So I don't want to call them failings, but for lack of a better word, the failings of our education systems throughout the levels, right, they don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in systems that aren't supporting in the way that they should. So hopefully, these kinds of conversations also highlight stuff like that, because now we know that in the past this room would be full, but people are now able to attend this conference without being here, right? So that for me looks like the future of education, that I don't have to come to the university to be here physically for me to get a degree. And it had been happening elsewhere with people doing online degrees without ever having to travel. But for us to address things like that, we also need to address other challenges around connectivity, which affect young people. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Benjamin, I think really brings it home because, as from the looks of things, he's a young man. Also is dealing with young people, and these are the challenges we face. And Professor, I think he really unearths a lot of things that we would love to hear your wisdom on and what Makerere has been doing. For example, the issue of equity in digitization. I know that we work with young people that we hire, Teach for Uganda, we hire graduates, train them and place them in rural communities, rural public schools, UPE, to teach young people that they too can have a future like themselves, that they can be graduates of Makerere at one point. But the challenge we've had actually has been, how do we train virtually when young people in Gulu, young people in Masindi, young people in Mayuge cannot get online? And I'm wondering, I think it's also a challenge for you, Professor, because the issue of equities, you have thousands and thousands, I don't know the number here at Makerere, but who are almost able to get online. What are the challenges that have emerged out of that? And do you feel like digital education is going to really help us improve the sector by bringing that equity, or will it actually marginalize more children, more young people who cannot get online and be able to learn from this great institution?
Thank you. I think we can never know how to solve a problem unless we begin solving it. So it was extremely important that in the midst of those challenges, we begin solving it. Before we implemented the online, and by the way, we didn't implement online full scale. We did what we call blended learning. So we are aware that there are students in areas where they cannot join a class in real time. And so lecturers will send emails and other forms of communication. What is important is for us to know what we need to do, where we want to go, and focus on that. And everybody will find their location there. We send people across the country to be sure that we will reach the students in the remotest areas. And so people went to what we call the remotest areas of Uganda, and they would still access our facilities. The only problem is sometimes the internet is not stable, and sometimes, especially people in very rural areas, even charging a phone, you have to walk 5 kilometers to go where there is electricity. There are some of those challenges. But I already said that our students are actually what I believe they did was to move closer to areas where there is need. Because we must move on. We cannot say because we don't have this, we are not going to go to Uganda. So we are putting in place several mechanisms to ensure equity, including equity for students with disabilities. So for students with disabilities, we made special consideration and allowed them to come and meet their lecturers physically during that period. And even now we are doing that, where they are not of course, especially those who are visually impaired. We put in place measures also to do with gender. The UN Women representative said we must not leave women behind. I think we are pioneers in Africa in gender mainstreaming, and everybody comes here to learn from us. When I came to this university, we had the women students were only 10% of the university enrollment. Now they are 51%. So yes, there will be challenges, but we cannot tackle those challenges without beginning at this.
Thank you, Professor. I think you can hear our audience both here and online that actually you cannot begin to solve a challenge unless you know its root cause, unless you know the problem exactly. And I appreciate too, Professor, that you mentioned the issue of disability. Thank you for mentioning that as well. In terms of access for people with disabilities, the visually impaired or want to learn, and then the issue of women. And I think it deserves another round of applause, but also Makerere leadership for 51% now representation. I think that is really something to be lauded for. I am proud that my dear wife, because a partner is like your lifeblood. She's a graduate of Makerere Medical School, and she's been doing research that is transforming lives in HIV. So I think for me, when you say women representation, I get excited because I know that I have a partner who has been vital in my life because of Makerere University. So thank you, Chancellor. Benjamin, I know that you work in civil society, and civil society is known as one of those levers of our society that actually pushes the button on government, on other players in the sector and corporates to ensure that sense of equity. So tell us the lessons that you've learned in bringing this digital reality to our young people, but also do you see it really coming in full circle so that we are not left behind, as Professor saying, or we still have lots of ways to go to leapfrog our society? I know that in our primary education system, our UPE, we still have a huge challenge. But I know you deal with young people from university and high school. How is the digitization looking in terms of leapfrogging, getting there? Will we see the homogeneity within our education system as we move forward, or will there be those pockets of inequity all over the country? Thank you.
First of all, I think it was the director of CAS who said the university does not exist in a vacuum, right? And I think that it's also important for us to understand that the inequity exists already, right? There are children that will go to better quality schools, either because of where they are born or who they are born to. And the reverse is also true. So I don't believe that under the context in which we exist, we're going to have a one size, one solution fit all, which could also take us to the conversation around whether the education that we give, where it's a one size fit all, is also the proper way for us to learn, right? So I think there's going to always be, when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, right? There's going to be people that will be left behind regardless of what we do. Either because of the socio-economic context in which we exist, or where they are, or whatever it is, or policies or whatever. So that is going to exist. But what I think we need to do is that we can standardize some things. Access, for example, can be standardized, right? Or thinking around, and I like that the professor talked about problem solving, right? That while we are thinking around integrating technology in education with EduTech, right? What are we doing for people that we know will take longer to get connected, right? In the meantime, how are we ensuring continuity for them, right? Are we thinking about tools that allow for them to study still or access knowledge even outside of smartphones and things like that? So for example, you've seen, I think UNICEF has that U-Report tool, which essentially is SMS, right? And people are able to access information because the assumption is that sometimes you won't always have access to internet. So we need to be thinking about solutions that plug into technology, but also recognize that for some people or for some learners, technology might not be here now, and we need to, support them. And let me just give like little example, which is a good thing because the Vice Chancellor is here. So I'm applying for a PhD. And I've been trying to process my transcript from this great university for the last so many weeks. It's going into a couple of months now, and I haven't, right? Because it's stuck somewhere in one office or another. You go here, it's in another office. You go to another office, it's in another office. And this process has been going on. And I remember sharing it online, and I got responses from so many people who said they had actually given up or they ran after their transcripts. But we also know that it's possible to get a transcript on the day you graduate, because that has happened here before. I got my undergrad transcript on the day I graduated from this same university. So why does my master's transcript require me to ask for leave days from my workplace to just chase after a paper? And we also know that in other universities, when the pandemic hit, they closed universities, sent their people home, the people graduated, they held online graduations, and they received their transcripts through mail or whatever. So those sorts of things, I wonder, I think they move from online, rather from offline to online, to accelerate opportunities is very, very important. I just don't know how we can accelerate it, right? So that we are able, because when you accelerate these sorts of things, technology, right? You also accelerate opportunities. The more young people you're able to give quality learning, right, in real time, the more opportunities for work, the more opportunities for entrepreneurship, the more opportunities for quality of life and livelihoods you're able to guarantee. When you don't, or if the slower you are, the more there's a crisis down the line. So I think that as we think about this digital insertion into education, we need to figure out what processes don't need humans anymore, or need the least interaction of humans, so that we can accelerate those processes and get more young people out there doing the things that they need to be doing.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you for that, those points on the spot. I think I see the professor is itching to answer some of these things, but let's again take it higher to, we are talking about, Professor, reimagining higher education. Reimagining is a big word. I don't want us to lose sight of that. We are reimagining higher education to be able to accelerate opportunity, like what Benjamin is saying. And we are not looking at you only, Professor. This is a public institution. Maybe there are leaders that, Professor, that you know, that also should be listening to this, that if we are to imagine higher education, especially in the context of this geopolitics, so that Africa or Uganda is not left behind, can we think about how to accelerate? And then turning to that, Professor will answer his questions. I know very well that there's no greater education system greater than its teachers or its leaders like yourself. How are we also developing leaders to get to be at that same level? At my organization, we talk about when we are scaling, we must also scale ourselves. We must also put in the speed, learn the skills very fast online to be able to reach that level of scaling. And now, as these challenges are coming, Professor, we need our teachers, our professors, even our leaders in those departments that Benjamin is talking about, to be ready for this transformation. How are we preparing that, Professor? And what should we look forward to as Makerere turns 100 years next year?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say to Benjamin that I apologize for the problem we are going through. That is unlike Makerere. And as you say, these days we make every effort to make sure that students get their transcripts of graduation. But we are working on those issues, and indeed, Makerere is digitizing very fast. If you remember, people used to line up to go scan and bring applications. That is no more, because everything is being done online. So people even wonder where everything is from. We don't see them coming to apply because they are doing everything online. The ultimate is for students who have graduated to be able to print their own transcripts wherever they will be.
And we are working on that. So that they don't have to come here. If they want to be here, they will give you a time. And then they print their transcripts. Of course, they will need to. They might need to bring them physically if their employer is doubting an original transcript to get it authenticated. Now, we, as I have said, are digitizing very fast. We are lucky that we have had partners who have given us facilities here. We have the best IT infrastructure at any university in Africa, outside South Africa, because of the good partners we have had. And that's the way I think my chancellor is saying, let's love everybody. We have people who love us, and they have helped us with this. We are training all our staff on digitization. We have made tremendous strides in this. The student platform has been digitized for some time now. We have just completed digitizing all our human resource issues. The library is digitized. We subscribe to more than 40,000 online journals. So even when we are physically closed, the library is open because people can actually access all these journals and books which we are subscribing to. It is expensive, but we say that is the priority where we should put our resources. So training of staff is ongoing to ensure that everybody actually becomes digital. I was in an organization, I visited one of the managing directors in Kampala here. And his office was like a bear because there was no people. And he told me it is a crime to be seen with a piece of paper in his office. And that's where we want to go. And we are working on it.
I thank you for the professor there, and thank you for that. And Makerere being the leading premier institution, really, I think would look forward for that, towards that. I'm reminded that we have our Irish director online, Sylvie Matley. Maybe, Sylvie, if you could hear us, I would love for you, if you could capture it for us on this question. Who would you think will set the tone and the standards for reimagining higher education at the global level? I think from the iris you are able to see globally, and maybe further to that, how can Uganda, Makerere University, and other universities tap into that? Who will set the tone and the standards in reimagining higher education at the global level? Thank you, Sophie.
James, and thank you very much to the French Embassy, to the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung and the Makerere University for inviting me to participate in that panel. I'm just an economist, I'm not a specialist of education, and I will give you some remarks, but please take the remarks with some prudence, because I can only talk about my experience as teacher for more than 20 years now. As a founder, I'm responsible of a training on geoeconomics at IRIS, and also as deputy director of IRIS, because as you may know, IRIS is a school, IRIS, preparing students to Master 1 and Master 2. I think that COVID, even if COVID time was a hard time for education, professors and students, education was yet in a transition. It was just, that time of COVID was only a period that accelerated the trend. Clearly with brutality, a lot of difficulties, but perhaps finally helping that changes and helping also to fix that difficulties. If I may share with you the experiences we had at IRIS during that time. Remember in France, our students spent almost 2 years in lockdown and trying to learn from their home and with only digital and distance learning. And we have seen a lot of difficulties at that time because most of the time students thought that it was easier for us to do distance learning. In reality, that's really costly, costly in terms of money, costly in terms of time. We are managing distance learning is really difficult, and it's sometimes not understood by our students, and it was difficult to manage the relation with our students, between the student and professors. We have also seen other difficulties during that period. First, the lack of training of teachers and professors from the primary and second schools, clearly, but not only. At the university, in higher education, we are not all ready to use distance learning tools. Sometimes we didn't even know how it could work, and that was difficult to ensure classes and courses in that circumstances. Another consequences, and that's important to take it into account, was that that time put more in evidence than ever the inequalities between students. We had some students that that have their own bedroom with their own computer, a good connection, that were able to learn correctly, even with distance learning. And in the other side, in the other hand, you have students that need to go to the bathroom to have a little bit of quiet to be able to participate to the class. They were only connected with their phone. And clearly, that was a real problem to ensure justice and equity between our students. But what we have seen also is that beyond that practical problems, the distance learning create new habits, and also new difficulties. A lot of students feel loneliness, and clearly the lack of interactions between students between students and professors, I would say, has reduced the ability of students to learn. And in the post-COVID time, we can see, because now we come back to classroom, we can see how that lockdowns had consequences, and still have today consequences for our students, but also for the professors. For example, our students have much more difficulties to concentrate today during the classroom than previously. Then what I would like to say is that, okay, we have learned a lot of things during that COVID period. We have developed new tools. We have became better on that new tools, but I think we have to take all this learning, all we have realized during that period to fix these things and to find a good way between distance learning and real courses, because I think that digital education is the future, as it has been said. Yet it creates a lot of opportunities to share learning, to cooperate, to enlarge the supply of education for students, to facilitate the access to education for other students all over the world. But I think we have to take into account that it won't never totally replace classical courses and that interaction. Perhaps we may find a way way to create interaction between people, even in distance learning. And I think another thing, I'm always surprised. I don't know if you have the same impression in Africa, but I am always surprised to realize that our political leaders talk to invest a lot in a lot of fields, health, infrastructure, climate change, development, etc., but not so much in education and in learning. And I hope that they will realize that we need more and more means to develop education all over the world. We need strong support from our political leader because the world, because economy, because development need more and more high-skilled workers and high-skilled workers from all over the world. There is a strong lack today in France, for example, but also in Europe, of high-skilled workers. That's difficult to find people to take that job because there is more job today than people to be able to take that job. And that's really important to invest in education and to invest well in that reform, in that revolution we are in front of concerning education. I hope my words were clear, and I hope it was an answer to your question. Well, thank you.
You can hear me. We need to give Sylvie Matley another round of applause, please. Thank you. I think she brought up major points, and I think let me quickly underscore them for our audience here who are having probably some challenges hearing her very well, but also those online. I think she mentioned really that it has been challenging to do distance learning. It's challenging across the globe, not just for Uganda, but also for France and other countries. So let's underscore that, as our professor mentioned, that really distance learning is hard. However, she also appealed to our think about the inequalities and also the inequities and justice in education, and also called upon that we need to see public our politicians or policymakers investing more in this education, this digital education, because she underscored it that really we invest in other things, climate change and other issues, agriculture and others, but then she has not seen much of that focus on how we reimagine education, how we invest in education so that it prepares the high-skilled worker. I think she really emphasized that even in France, even in this world, as we emerge out of COVID-19 era, that we need a high-skilled worker, and it is high time that we really, our public leaders, our policy leaders, that we invested in education. And I think, Professor, let me go back to you really on that. We have these wonderful partners who are here. As we talk about who set the stage for the standards of imagining higher education on a global level, for you, what should government, what should private sector, maybe working with you at the higher institutions, maybe working with others, what should we be doing really if we want to see Uganda in particular, but also Africa, also leapfrogging like the way we did with the cell phone. I mean, the cell phone, even when I lived in the West, they were still struggling actually to do mobile payments on the phone. They were still doing, going in the bank with their card. But we were the first ones, to bring, mobile payments on the phone. And I believe that education needs to be a bit leapfrogged in Africa so that we can also inch towards the Chinas, the Indias and others, so we also are able to compete like our friends told us. So, Professor, what should we be doing and on this level?
Yeah, I think what we need to do is to invest in education. There is no shortcut to development.
We have formed an alliance of what we call the 18 top research universities in Africa. We call ourselves Alliance for Research Universities of Africa, ARUA. And the aim is to change around the current situation where Africa has a sixth of the population of the world, but we are producing 2% of knowledge. And if that situation continues, there is no way we are going to break out of poverty. So investment in higher education is urgently required. We must do research in our own issues and also contribute to global knowledge. And there are a lot of examples to show why this is very important. When COVID struck, it was actually Makerere professors who were running around and advising governments on what to do and trying to come up with innovations. If they were not there, probably the situation would have been much worse. And I always want to give a very simple example. About 15, 20 years ago, there was a famine in eastern Uganda, and people were dying, and the World Health Organization was getting defeated. World Food Organization. But a group of researchers came up with a variety of cassava which is resistant to drought. It is now 20 years, there have been droughts in eastern Uganda. There has never been a famine in eastern Uganda. If we want to break out of poverty, we must invest in higher education and research. Makerere University has strategized to become a research-led university in the next 10 years. We are already, by our standards on the continent, one of the most research-intensive universities, but we believe we must do more. So the simple answer is invest in higher education.
Thank you, Professor. And I think we need to give him a round of applause there and appreciate his leadership. I think he mentioned something that really touched my heart, that we are the sixth, if I quoted you very well, in terms of the population in the world, number 6th. But then we contribute only 2%, right, Professor, of the skilled workforce. That should shake us a bit, in terms of the leaders we are creating, that we are pushing into the world. Benjamin, as I turn to you, you work with young people, you are even seen on media as one of those who champions the skilling of young people, the 21st century skills of young people. What should government, what should civil society do, what should corporates? Because I feel like now, with the COVID era, we have all learned that we are in one nation, like our chancellor said earlier, that we live in this unified globe, even though there are those demarcations on a paper, but when you look at it, right now the DRC friends of ours, our brothers are here coming to Uganda. Those things are only on paper. Now, as we think about skilling young leaders, what should government, the civil society, but also corporates be doing to ensure that we also leapfrog our education system? Thank you.
Thank you, James. I think the simple answer is the one that Professor gave. Investing in education. You need money to do these sorts of things, right? But just to add to that, I think the other thing for us to start thinking about is when we talk about skilling, what is it that we mean, right? Because I think there's a contradiction between what we mean when we say skilling and what the market actually needs, right? And this is let me just, so I think earlier I talked about fourth industrial revolution and the future of work and things like that. So when we talk about skilling, there's the aspect of the technical skilling, which is I think an obsession of a lot of people, right? Let's send people to vocational schools, right? But I think what we need, even more importantly, if we are reimagining higher education, is skilling the mind, which we are not doing a lot of. There is no point having 1 million plumbers, yeah? If those plumbers cannot see the problems that exist, cannot solve them creatively, cannot, don't know how to find clients, don't know how to keep them, don't know how to create opportunity, right? They will not find work if they aren't taught to, if their mind is not skilled. It's the same thing with lawyers, doctors, engineers. This university here could produce 2,000 of the best engineers in the world, yeah? But if their mind is not skilled, if they don't know how to think creatively, if they don't know how to solve problems, if they can't work with others, if they can't communicate their value properly, they will not find work. So when we talk, I think on top of investing money, we also need to invest in defining what we think skilling is, right? And I think that as we reimagine education, that is a starting point. That skilling is not what you do with your hands, right? It's what your mind can do or what your mind tells your hands to do. And we are not doing that. And so there are opportunities, now that means there are opportunities for skilling, right? There are opportunities for upskilling and opportunities for reskilling. The professor was talking about having universities, the university teaching its people, its professors how to use technology, right? That's upskilling, right? Yes. Because they already had a skill, now you're adding something else. So there are opportunities for things like that if we are going to reimagine education. And then lastly, when you think about technology, there are two things that technology does for you. One is it creates opportunities for learning that didn't exist before, right? And this is learning and teaching, by the way, which didn't exist before. If this was a lecture room and you had one lecturer sitting here, right? If you turn this into, if you enable technology, learning through technology, that means you can have a lot more people who are not necessarily professional teachers able to contribute to the process of education, right? And we need more professionals in our classrooms, right? Because that's how the professors can only give so much. You need people in industry, in classrooms, in lecture rooms, telling young people or working with young people on what the industry needs, right? And those opportunities technology can enable. Where they can't come into classrooms physically, we can enable them to come to be in classrooms. The second point is that technology breaks barriers that education as it is now couldn't break. So technology breaks barriers of space, right? It breaks barriers of time. It breaks barriers of distance. It also breaks costs. 2 years ago, if you came to Boundless Minds and told us you have a grant for us to skill 2,000 people in a year, 2,000 young people in a year, we would have told you that's not possible for us to do because we can't guarantee the quality. We could give you the number, but we won't guarantee the quality. 1 year later, because we have a platform where all of our modules are, which give access to anybody depending on where they are, in this same year, we've reached 3,000 young people, right? In the middle of a pandemic. And that's what technology does for you. And I think that's why you need money to enable those technologies, but you also need the mindset. You need the mind trained to stop resisting change, because it's here.
Thank you, Benjamin. I think really that was a long clap. Our time is against us. I'm gonna give us our last comments from Professor there. Benjamin talked about upskilling, which you're already doing, but also bringing industry leaders closer to the students at university, because we are preparing students or leaders of the industry, not of where we are in the schools. So there needs to be that integration there. As we talk about how can the African continent harness these changes and close the gaps in access to higher education, and skilling, which we already talked about. Help us share with us what's Makerere doing there, and how can we really bring this industry closer to the people, but also to the students, but also in terms of the digitization, so that we are not left behind, as you were saying. Thank you.
Let me begin by referring to the comment again of mindset change. I think we need a serious mindset change in Africa. You have heard students shouting because they are campaigning for guild and now we told them this is COVID time, campaign online. But their mindset is you cannot campaign without shouting. And yet they could reach many more people by simply going on their phone and saying, I'm so campaigning for this. But now they're shouting and they're just straight over them. So mindset change. We're actually planning to begin a program on mindset change at this university. Working with the Koreans. They have been doing it for a long time. So that people are empowered to know they can do things they thought they would not be able to do. We have so many brilliant people in this university, young students. Yesterday, I tweeted about a young software engineer who has come up with an app, which I think is going to revolutionize IT in the world if we did it right. Because I've not seen it anywhere else in the world. But he demonstrated, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So, mindset change is extremely important. But coming to your question on what do we do, how do we get from here, I think we just need to remain focused. We need to know that there is no shortcut to emancipating our people from poverty without investing in higher education and research. Our young people and professors need to know that we have a huge responsibility of bringing our continent out of poverty. Because we are a privileged small group in whom the rest have simply invested. They have invested in us because they have hope in us to bring them out of that poverty. So the young people who are here, the students, the future is yours. You either spoil it or you bring light to our continent by doing the right thing. Change your minds.
I think friends and our sponsors and our partners in CAS, really, we've heard it from the professor, we've heard it from a young man who is leading young leaders, we've heard it from our friend at Iris. I think we need to really invest in education and no shortcuts. Thank you, Professor, for that. There's no shortcuts for social transformation of the African continent without investing in education. Again, young people, we need to invest, those who are young people, invest in the mindset change to be able to upskill them and upskill our leaders in the universities as well as in civil societies to ensure that our young people are prepared for tomorrow. And as we think about, as we move out, as we imagine education, I want to thank you, Professor, for that wisdom, for your great leadership, and let's continue charging forward to ensure that we leapfrog Africa out of this. Thank you, Benjamin, and thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you those online. My name is James Kasaga Reitwe, and have a good one, and enjoy the conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for our panelists and our moderator.
I think the main takeaways from the conversation was the importance of technology in accelerating the process of learning, but also the inequity that has posed, especially for Uganda, but also Africa, where so many young people are connected and others are not. So we probably have a generation that's been left behind in terms of skilling and learning during the pandemic. I think one of the main challenges that education is facing is that there are millions of young people who have not been able to learn over the last 2 years because all the players, government, civil society, educationists have not figured out how to continue learning experiences for those learners. But the second one is more long-term, that as a result of them not learning, economies and countries are going to have to rethink a lot of the things that they are doing, especially in future, in terms of the labor, the skilled labor available to them, because of how many young people haven't been able to learn. And of course, you've had, young people falling into crime or things like early teenage pregnancy and things like that, that are a result of young people, of education coming to a halt during the pandemic. I think that the purpose of education is a lot more than learning. I think education is supposed to deliver a good or a service to the community, making the learner lead innovation and thinking in their community. Why that becomes a problem is that you have, for example, young people coming out of the school system when they are not able to transition to work. And the reason why they are not able to transition to work is not because they don't have technical skill. It is because they lack the intellectual skills, or what are called 21st century skills that are important for the future of work. Critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, collaboration, those sorts of skills are very, very important. And yet our education systems are not delivering them. And that there was an opportunity for us to rethink how to do that during the pandemic or post-pandemic, which we haven't done, and that's the worry.